David sat in his high-rise office, staring blankly at the city skyline. He had everything he once dreamed of: wealth, status, influence. Yet he felt an emptiness that no success could fill. His mind was restless, his heart burdened with an inexplicable fatigue. No matter how much he achieved, there was always another goal, another expectation, another voice telling him he wasn't enough. One evening, after yet another exhausting day, David came across an article about a revered Buddhist monk, Master Thomas, who lived in solitude atop a quiet mountain temple. It was said that those who sought his wisdom left with a newfound sense of clarity and peace. Desperate for answers, David made a decision. He would travel to meet the old monk. After a long journey, David finally arrived at the temple, nestled between rolling hills and surrounded by towering trees. The air was crisp, filled with the scent of pine and incense. He expected some kind of grand reception, or at least a profound conversation. Instead, when he was led to the main hall, Master Thomas simply sat in stillness, watching the garden, saying nothing. David, unaccustomed to silence, shifted uncomfortably. Minutes passed, yet the monk remained quiet. "Excuse me, Master," David finally spoke, breaking the silence. "I came here seeking wisdom. I feel lost. I need guidance." Master Thomas turned to him, his gaze gentle yet piercing. Still he said nothing. David felt frustration rising. Was this some kind of test? Why wouldn't the monk speak? Just as he was about to question the monk again, Master Thomas finally smiled and said, "Silence is not the absence of meaning. It is the space where wisdom emerges." David frowned. He had spent his entire life surrounded by noise, meetings, phone calls, the constant hum of city life. Silence had always felt empty, even unbearable. But here, in this sacred space, silence felt different. It was not empty at all. It was full. In a world filled with distractions, we often seek answers outside ourselves, the monk continued. But true understanding comes from within. If you truly wish to find clarity, you must first master the art of silence. David was intrigued, but skeptical. How could something as simple as silence bring him the peace he longed for? He had come looking for words of wisdom, yet this monk offered him nothing but quiet. The monk slowly stood up and gestured for David to follow. They walked through the temple gardens, where the sound of rustling leaves and chirping birds filled the air. "Listen," Master Thomas said. "Can you hear the wisdom in nature? It speaks, yet it does not use words." David closed his eyes for a moment, focusing on the subtle sounds around him. The world was alive, speaking in a language he had never taken the time to understand. "Stay," Master Thomas said. "Learn." And so, David stayed. Over the next few days, he would come to understand the true power of silence and self-focus. Through Master Thomas's teachings, he would uncover 7 lessons that would change the way he saw the world, and himself, forever. Join us on this journey as we explore these 7 Buddhist teachings on silence, inner strength, and self-mastery. If Pankina, you find wisdom in these lessons, support our channel by liking, subscribing, and sharing this story with others seeking inner peace. Lesson 1. Redefining silence. David awoke early the next morning, the first rays of sunlight peeking through the temple's wooden shutters. He stepped outside, expecting to be greeted by the sound of morning prayers or words of instruction. Instead, he was met with a profound stillness. Only the rustling of leaves and distant birdsong broke the silence. The quiet felt unnerving. Master Thomas was already sitting in the meditation hall, his eyes half closed, his breathing steady. David hesitated before stepping forward. "Master, why is it so quiet here? I thought wisdom came from learning, from discussion." The old monk opened his eyes and smiled. "Wisdom does not come from noise, David. It comes from stillness. Many fear silence because they associate it with emptiness. But true silence is not the absence of sound. It is the presence of awareness. David frowned. But when I'm silent, my thoughts get louder. It becomes unbearable. The monk nodded knowingly. That is because you have not yet befriended your own mind. You have spent your life filling every moment with distractions. The moment those distractions fade, you feel lost. But silence is not your enemy. It is your guide. Master Thomas gestured for David to sit beside him. Close your eyes and, listen, not just to the sounds around you, but to yourself. Let the silence reveal what you have been avoiding. David hesitated, but obeyed. At first, all he heard was the pounding of his own heart, the restless chatter of his thoughts. But slowly, as he focused on his breathing, the chaos in his mind began to settle. The silence no longer felt empty. It felt full. In silence, we see ourselves clearly, the monk said softly. When you redefine silence as a space of understanding rather than avoidance, it becomes your greatest teacher. As David opened his eyes, a new realization dawned on him. Silence was not something to escape from. It was something to embrace. Reflection. When was the last time you sat in complete silence without distraction? What thoughts or emotions surfaced, and how did you respond to them? Can you begin to view silence as a tool for self-discovery rather than discomfort? Join us as we continue exploring the path to inner peace through the next lesson. Lesson 2. Transforming loneliness into solitude. As the days passed, David found himself struggling with the quiet. Without the constant noise of the outside world, emails, meetings, and conversations, he felt an unsettling emptiness creeping in. He sat by the temple's pond one afternoon, watching the ripples dance across the water, when Master Thomas approached and sat beside him. You seem troubled, David, the monk observed. David sighed. I've spent my whole life surrounded by people. Now, in this silence, I feel lonely. Master Thomas nodded knowingly. Most people mistake loneliness for solitude. Loneliness is the longing for external company, while solitude is the discovery of one's own company. The difference lies in how you perceive it. David looked up, intrigued. But how do I embrace solitude without feeling isolated? The monk picked up a small stone and tossed it into the pond. The ripples expanded outward. Do you see how the water responds? It is still itself, yet it embraces the movement. Solitude is like that. It allows you to be with yourself, not against yourself. David thought for a moment. So, instead of resisting solitude, I should learn to sit with it? Master Thomas smiled. Yes. Loneliness seeks fulfillment from outside, while solitude allows you to find fulfillment within. When you stop fearing your own presence, you begin to understand yourself in ways you never have before. That evening, David sat alone in the meditation hall. But for the first time, he wasn't afraid of the silence. He welcomed it, letting it wrap around him like a familiar friend. Reflection. Have you ever mistaken loneliness for solitude? How can you learn to enjoy your own presence? What small steps can you take to embrace solitude in your daily life? Continue with us as we move forward on this journey to inner peace in the next lesson. Lesson 3. Using silence as a tactical weapon. David had always believed that words were his greatest tool, whether in business negotiations, personal relationships, or moments of conflict. He thought that by speaking, he could assert control, gain influence, or defend himself. But Master Thomas was about to challenge that belief. One morning, as they walked through the temple gardens, David asked, Master, how do you handle criticism? Do you ever feel the need to defend yourself? The old monk paused near a flowering tree and gestured to the petals that had fallen to the ground. A flower does not argue with the wind when its petals are carried away. It does not fight to prove its beauty. It simply exists, unaffected by opinions. David furrowed his brow. So, you're saying I should never respond to criticism? Master Thomas smiled. Not quite. Silence is not about weakness or submission. It is about choosing where to invest your energy. There are moments when words are necessary, but often silence holds more power. He continued, when faced with anger, silence disarms. When confronted with ignorance, silence exposes. When surrounded by chaos, silence restores peace. Words often add fuel to conflict, but silence allows space for wisdom. David thought back to past arguments, to moments when his pride had driven him to defend himself unnecessarily. So, instead of reacting, I should pause, he asked. Master Thomas nodded. Yes, silence is not passive. It is intentional. When you master it, you gain control over yourself and the situation. That day, David chose to practice silence. When frustration arose, he observed it. When someone provoked him, he withheld his response. And in that silence, he discovered a newfound strength. Reflection. Have you ever spoken out of impulse and later regretted it? In what situations could silence serve you better than words? How can you begin? Practicing mindful silence in your daily life? Continue with us as we explore the next lesson on the path to inner mastery. Lesson 4. Eliminating the addiction to validation. David sat beneath the shade of an ancient tree, watching the temple monks go about their daily routines with quiet contentment. There were no accolades, no praise, only the peaceful rhythm of their existence. He envied their serenity. Master, David asked hesitantly, why do I always seek approval from others? Why does it feel like I am only as valuable as the praise I receive? Master Thomas smiled knowingly. Because you have given others the power to define your worth. But tell me, David, if the sun required applause to shine, would it ever rise? David pondered the question. He had spent years chasing validation through promotions, social status, and the admiration of peers, yet none of it had brought lasting fulfillment. The more you rely on external approval, the monk continued, the more you become a prisoner of it. True self-worth comes not from the voices around you, but from the silence within you. David sighed. But how do I break free? It feels impossible. Master Thomas picked up a small bowl and filled it with water. Imagine this bowl represents your mind, he said. He then dropped a handful of pebbles into it, causing the water to spill over. These pebbles are the opinions of others. When you let them in, they overflow, leaving no space for your own sense of self. David nodded, finally understanding. If he wanted to find inner peace, he had to stop giving weight to external validation. That evening, he reflected on his actions. He chose to appreciate his work without seeking recognition, to feel content without approval, and to trust that his worth was intrinsic. For the first time, he felt lighter. Reflection. In what ways do you seek validation from others? How can you begin to recognize and appreciate your own worth without external approval? What would change in your life if you no longer depended on validation? Join us as we continue this journey to inner peace in the next lesson. Lesson 5. Mastering the Art of Strategic Withdrawal. The temple was quiet, save for the occasional rustling of leaves as a gentle breeze swept through the courtyard. David found Master Thomas tending to a small garden, carefully pulling out weeds. The monk's actions were deliberate, purposeful. Curious, David approached. Master, what are you doing? Without looking up, the monk replied, I am removing what no longer serves this garden, so the flowers have space to grow. David sat down beside him. I feel like my life is filled with unnecessary burdens, expectations, toxic relationships, endless responsibilities. But I can't just walk away from everything. Master Thomas finally turned to him. Walking away and withdrawing are not the same. One is escape, the other is wisdom. To withdraw strategically means to create space for growth, just like this garden. David thought for a moment. So sometimes stepping back isn't failure, but a way to protect and nurture myself. The monk nodded. Exactly. The world teaches us to always push forward, but in truth, knowing when to step back is just as important. A warrior does not fight every battle, only the ones worth his energy. David exhaled deeply, realizing how often he had exhausted himself, fighting battles that drained his soul. That night, he made a conscious decision. He would no longer pour energy into things that did not bring him growth or peace. He would learn to withdraw, not out of fear, but out of wisdom. Reflection. Are there areas in your life where withdrawal could bring clarity and peace? How can you distinguish between escaping and stepping back with purpose? What burdens are you holding on to that no longer serve your growth? Continue with us as we explore the next lesson on the path to inner mastery. Lesson 6. Letting results be your loudest voice. David had always believed in the power of words. He had built a career on convincing others, whether in boardrooms, negotiations, or personal relationships. Yet despite all his talking, he felt unseen, unheard, as if his words had lost their impact. One morning, as David walked through the temple gardens, he found Master Thomas silently tending to a row of saplings. The monk did not speak, did not call attention to his work, and yet the care and patience he showed were evident in every movement. David finally broke the silence. Master, I have spent my life trying to prove myself through words, yet it never seems to be enough. Why do I feel like I have to keep justifying my worth? Master Thomas continued tending to the plants before responding. A tree does not announce its growth. It simply grows, and in time, its presence becomes undeniable. David pondered this. So, you're saying I should stop trying to prove myself and just focus on my actions? The monk nodded. Exactly. Let your results speak for themselves. The most powerful voices are not the loudest. They are the most consistent. A person who acts with integrity and discipline does not need to seek approval. Their results will become their voice. David thought back to all the times he had over-explained, argued, or sought recognition. What if, instead of speaking so much, he simply let his actions show who he was? That day, he resolved to do less talking and more doing. He would let his growth be seen, not spoken. Reflection. In what areas of your life do you feel the need to prove yourself with words? How can you shift your focus from seeking validation to letting your results speak for themselves? What actions can you take today that will demonstrate your growth without explanation? Join us as we approach the final lesson on the path to inner mastery. Lesson 7. Discovering freedom in not reacting. David had spent much of his life reacting to criticism, to setbacks, to things beyond his control. He had always believed that a quick response was a sign of strength. But since arriving at the temple, he had begun to question that belief. One afternoon, David sat with Master Thomas by a small pond, watching the koi fish glide effortlessly through the water. The monk picked up a small pebble and dropped it into the pond. Ripples spread outward, disturbing the water's calm surface before slowly fading away. The mind is like this pond, Master Thomas said. Each reaction is a ripple. The more you react, the more you disturb your own peace. David sighed. But sometimes, I feel like I have to react. If someone insults me, if something unfair happens, isn't it natural to respond? The monk nodded. It is natural, but is it necessary? The strongest person is not the one who reacts to every disturbance, but the one who chooses when to act and when to remain still. David thought about this. He had wasted so much energy reacting to negativity, anger, frustration, stress. What if, instead of responding impulsively, he simply observed? Master Thomas continued, "When you learn to pause, to observe without immediate reaction, you gain control over your emotions. You free yourself from being pulled in every direction by outside forces." That day, David made a commitment to himself. He would no longer let his peace be dictated by the actions of others. He would observe, reflect, and choose his responses wisely. And in that choice, he found a newfound sense of freedom. Reflection. How often do you react impulsively to situations? What would change if you took a moment to pause before responding? How can practicing non-reactivity bring more peace into your life? Thank you for joining this journey toward inner mastery. May these lessons guide you to a life of greater peace, clarity, and strength, embracing the power of silence. David prepared to leave the temple. He reflected on all that he had learned. Silence was no longer something to be feared, but a tool for wisdom. He had discovered strength in stillness, clarity in solitude, and freedom in non-reactivity. The lessons from Master Thomas had reshaped his perspective, teaching him that true peace comes not from controlling the outside world, but from mastering the mind within. Before departing, David turned to Master Thomas one last time. "How do I ensure I do not forget these lessons once I return to my old life?" The monk smiled. "Practice. Wisdom is not in knowing but in doing. Carry silence with you, not just in moments of meditation, but in your daily life. Let your actions speak more than your words. Choose your battles wisely, and most importantly, do not let the noise of the world drown out the voice of your inner peace." David bowed deeply, feeling a profound gratitude. He reflected on how much he had changed, from a restless seeker of external validation to someone who had found a quiet strength within. The wisdom he had gained was no longer just words spoken by a monk, but a truth he now carried in his heart. He knew that while his journey at the temple was ending, the real journey, the journey within, was just beginning. As he walked away from the temple, a newfound sense of peace accompanied him. He no longer sought happiness in external achievements, but understood that true fulfillment resided within. The city he once saw as a battlefield now appeared as an opportunity to practice his newfound wisdom. Just before he reached the temple gates, David turned and asked, "Master, is there any final advice you can give me?" Master Thomas simply smiled and said, "Silence is the answer." David nodded, absorbing the simplicity and depth of those words. He realized that true strength lay in restraint, in the ability to observe without reacting, and in the patience to allow life to unfold without force. The lessons of silence were not only about inner peace, but also about living with intention and purpose. As he stepped onto the winding path leading away from the temple, David felt lighter. He knew challenges awaited him, but for the first time, he felt equipped to face them without unnecessary resistance. He carried not only the wisdom of Master Thomas, but also a newfound trust in himself. The journey home was not a return to his old life, but the beginning of a more mindful existence. Final reflection. How can you integrate silence and mindfulness into your daily routine, as David learned to do at the temple? In what ways can you use these lessons, embracing solitude, letting go of validation, and choosing silence, to bring more peace into your life? What is one practice you can start today, inspired by David's journey, to cultivate inner stillness and resilience? Final message. Peace is not something you seek outside. It has always been within you. Practice silence, focus on yourself, and you will find the answers you need. If this story resonated with you, support our journey by liking and subscribing. Together, let's explore deeper Buddhist wisdom for a more peaceful and mindful life.